The world was never ready for what came next. A surge of static filled every corner of the world, and for a single haunting moment, the chaos felt like an eternity. The air was thick with tension, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any sound could. Then, in the deafening quiet, a voice, cold, mechanical, yet unmistakably alive, cut through the stillness. "They're already here." The words echoed through radios, televisions, and every other form of communication, sending a ripple of panic through every household. The message, jumbled and incomprehensible at first, soon sharpened into something terrifyingly clear. A signal, encrypted and far beyond any human technology, hummed through the air. A wave of fear washed over humanity. The aliens were not just coming, they were here, and the world had no idea how to stop them. In that moment, the weight of the truth settled in like a crushing blow. The protagonist, watching from a quiet room, heard it. The chilling, final line, "We've been waiting for you." Time stood still. The days following the transmission were filled with confusion and uncertainty. The world was in chaos, governments locked down, military forces mobilized, and the streets became deserted, haunted by the echoes of a once peaceful existence. In the midst of it all, the protagonist tried to make sense of what had happened. The government, desperate to control the narrative, declared the event an isolated incident, but deep down, everyone knew the truth. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. The message wasn't a warning, but a greeting. And that realization cut deeper than any weapon could. "They're already here," the word still echoed in the protagonist's mind. No one knew how to prepare for what was coming next. And worse yet, no one knew who, or what, the aliens truly were. The transmission had left the world on edge, with a sense of urgency hanging in the air. Governments scrambled to take control of the situation, but the true scale of what was happening was beyond their grasp. The protagonist felt a deep, unsettling weight as the world seemed to spin into chaos. On the streets, people were beginning to panic, unsure of what the future held. The unknown was terrifying, but even more so was the message that humanity had just received. The aliens were already here, and they were waiting. The protagonist knew that there was no going back from this moment. Every new development, every new piece of information was like a wave crashing over them, pulling them deeper into a fight they never wanted to be a part of. But it was too late. The world had changed, and now they would have to change with it, or risk being swallowed by the tidal wave of fear and uncertainty. The world had fallen into a deep state of confusion. Governments issued martial law, soldiers patrolled the streets, and the message of the aliens hung heavily in the air. The protagonist knew that things would never be the same again. The pressure to maintain order was intense, but the truth was beginning to seep out. People were questioning the government, wondering how much had been hidden from them. The protagonist's own fear was palpable. This was no longer just a distant threat. It was here, and it was real. With every passing hour, the world seemed to unravel a little more. They had no idea what the aliens wanted, only that the stakes were unimaginably high. The protagonist could feel it deep in their bones. The invasion had already begun. The question was no longer if humanity would survive, but how. In a world teetering on the edge of panic, they were forced to confront the stark reality. Humanity's future was no longer in their own hands. In the days that followed, the alien transmission became the centerpiece of every conversation. Governments were in disarray, and the world's militaries braced for an attack that no one understood. Amidst the confusion, the protagonist found themselves questioning everything they knew about the world. They were no longer sure who to trust, and worse yet, they began to feel the weight of a dark truth settling over them. Humanity was facing an existential threat, but no one knew how to fight back. The protagonist's heart raced as they watched the news, the alien language still echoing in their ears. "We've been waiting for you." It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. A message that somehow suggested humanity wasn't the target, but an unwilling participant in something much bigger. As the world around them spiraled into chaos, the protagonist realized that the fight had already begun. But it wasn't against the aliens alone. It was against an unknown force, hidden in plain sight, manipulating everything humanity thought it knew. The weeks that followed the alien transmission were filled with secrecy and lies. The government tried to maintain control, crafting a narrative to shield humanity from the truth. But the cracks in their story began to show. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of secret meetings, shadowy government officials working with extraterrestrial forces. People began to question everything, what was real and what was fabricated. The protagonist, grappling with the overwhelming weight of knowledge, dug deeper into the mysteries surrounding the aliens. They uncovered classified files, once hidden, now accessible. Documents detailing strange, unexplained events dating back decades. There were signs, connections no one had ever seen before. The invasion wasn't a new occurrence. It was part of a much darker, deeper plan. The truth was out there waiting to be discovered, and it was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. As the protagonist continued to dig into the dark corners of history, they stumbled upon a chilling realization. The aliens were not just invaders, they were being manipulated by the very same people who had orchestrated humanity's downfall. A covert faction within the government had been secretly working with the extraterrestrials for decades, trading resources, technology, and knowledge. This hidden alliance had shaped history, directing the course of events, and suppressing the truth from the public eye. The protagonist's mind reeled as they pieced together the puzzle. Humanity had been living in a fabricated reality, controlled by a small group of elites. And now, that reality was unraveling. The truth was far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The protagonist was no longer just uncovering secrets. They were on the verge of exposing a conspiracy that could change everything. The more the protagonist uncovered, the more isolated they became. Those they thought they could trust began to distance themselves, as if afraid of what the protagonist might reveal. Fear of the truth had begun to spread through the city. The protagonist's closest ally, someone they had confided in for years, turned out to be part of the conspiracy. In a cold, brutal confrontation, the truth came crashing down. The ally revealed their true identity as an alien sleeper agent, placed on Earth to ensure the smooth transition of the alien invasion. "You think I don't remember," they hissed, their voice now laced with something otherworldly. Betrayal burned through the protagonist's veins as the realization hit. Nothing was as it seemed. Every relationship had been a lie. And now, the protagonist had to face the painful truth. They were completely alone. The betrayal left the protagonist in a state of disbelief, torn between rage and heartbreak. Trust had been shattered, and now, more than ever, the walls of reality seemed to be collapsing in on them. The protagonist's fight was no longer just against the alien invaders. It was a battle for their very sense of self. Every person in their life, from friends to family, seemed to be caught in this web of deception. But amidst the confusion and pain, the protagonist found a sliver of hope. A hidden file, an encrypted message, one last piece of the puzzle that could expose everything. It was a risky move, one that could cost them their life, but they had no other choice. The truth had to be revealed, no matter the cost. As the protagonists prepared for the next step in their journey, they knew one thing for sure. There was no going back. The deeper the protagonist dug, the more they realized the world they knew was an illusion. The government's lies, the manipulation of humanity's history, it all led back to one thing. The alien invasion was never meant to be a singular event. It was part of a much larger plan, a takeover that had been in the works for decades. The protagonist's family, once thought to be ordinary, was entwined in the conspiracy in ways they couldn't yet fully comprehend. A bloodline that stretched back generations, tied to the aliens and their long-term plans for Earth. As the protagonist uncovered more, they were confronted with the chilling truth. Their own legacy was tied to the fate of humanity. The weight of this knowledge was suffocating, but it also gave the protagonist the strength to keep going. They were no longer just an observer, they were a player in a war that spanned across galaxies. The walls of the protagonist's world were crumbling faster than they could repair them. Each new piece of the puzzle they uncovered brought with it an even greater sense of isolation. The government, once a beacon of authority, was now revealed to be complicit in the alien conspiracy. But the truth wasn't just buried in classified documents and hidden files. It was in the streets, in the air, and in the people's eyes. The protagonist could feel the weight of the world pressing in on them, as though the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. The aliens weren't just here. They were being guided by forces within the government, forces that had manipulated humanity for generations. As the protagonist uncovered more secrets, they realized that the invasion was just one chapter in a much larger scheme. The aliens' arrival was the culmination of decades of planning, and the battle for Earth was far from over. The stakes had grown impossibly high, and the protagonist could feel the weight of humanity's future resting squarely on their shoulders. As the protagonist plunged deeper into the web of conspiracy, they began to understand just how far the betrayal went. The government's secrecy was not just about covering up the alien invasion, it was about control. The aliens had promised power, and humanity's leaders had been too eager to accept. With the truth slipping through their fingers, the protagonist knew that every step forward was a risk. Allies were growing scarce, and with each new revelation, the protagonist found themselves more alone. But, as the pieces of the conspiracy came together, something shifted within them. The world wasn't as it seemed, but that didn't mean it was hopeless. There was still a chance, if only they could expose the truth before it was too late. But as the protagonist prepared to take their next step, the danger grew ever closer. Their every move was now being watched, and every decision felt like a battle between life and death. The protagonist's fear had turned into determination. Betrayal and deception had created an unbreakable bond between the protagonist and the truth. Every moment was a struggle to maintain control, but with each passing hour, the protagonist grew more resolute. They could feel it, the alien presence, closer now than ever before. And then it happened. One of the people the protagonist had trusted most, someone who had been an ally for years, revealed their true identity. It was a cruel twist of fate. The protagonist's closest friend, the one person they thought they could rely on, was an alien sleeper agent. The revelation came with a harsh, venomous sneer. "You think I don't remember?" the friend hissed, their voice now dark and twisted. Betrayal stung with the force of 1,000 knives. The protagonist's world collapsed around them, leaving them with nothing but the weight of their responsibility and the crushing knowledge that they were utterly alone. The betrayal had cut deeper than anything the protagonist could have imagined. The pain of losing a trusted ally was overwhelming, but it also served as a wake-up call. The protagonist understood now that the war for Earth wasn't just about fighting the aliens. It was about fighting the very people they had trusted. Each secret, each piece of hidden knowledge, had brought them to this point. But with the truth now laid bare, the protagonist could no longer sit idly by. The decision had been made. The conspiracy had to be exposed. The protagonist didn't know how they would survive, or even if they would, but they had no choice. It was time to bring everything into the light. As they prepared to face the consequences, the weight of their decision settled on their shoulders. The battle ahead would not be easy, but it was the only chance humanity had left. The time had come. The protagonist had uncovered enough truth to send shockwaves through the world. But now, they had to make a choice: use the alien technology they had discovered to fight back, or expose the truth and risk destroying everything humanity had ever known. The choice was agonizing. To use the alien tech was tempting. It could give them the power to fight back, to turn the tide in humanity's favor. But at what cost? The protagonist knew the risks. Losing their humanity was a price too high, even for the sake of survival. Exposing the truth, on the other hand, could lead to mass chaos, uncertainty, and fear. But it was the only way to free humanity from the grip of the conspiracy. As the weight of the decision settled on the protagonist, they realized that there was no easy way out. The fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. The truth had always been right in front of the protagonist, but they had never fully understood it until now. The fragments of the conspiracy they had uncovered pointed to something far darker than they had imagined. The government wasn't just working with the aliens. They were working with them to change the very fabric of humanity's existence. It wasn't a simple alliance, but a full-scale takeover. Hidden records revealed that the protagonist's family, Their bloodline had been linked to this extraterrestrial scheme for generations. Their ancestors had been key players in orchestrating the alien intervention on Earth, and now it was the protagonists' turn to take their place in this unfolding drama. The weight of this revelation hit harder than anything before. The protagonist's legacy, the one thing they had tried so hard to escape, was now the key to either saving or damning humanity. The protagonist's mind raced as they processed the revelation. They had always thought of themselves as an ordinary person, someone without significant ties to history or destiny. But now they understood. They had always been part of this larger plan. The alien forces hadn't come to Earth just to invade. They had come for the protagonist, for the bloodline that had once helped pave the way for their arrival. This realization shattered everything the protagonist had known. Their legacy wasn't just about family pride. It was about control, power, and manipulation. The protagonist's ancestors had made deals with these extraterrestrial beings long before they were born, and now it was their turn to either continue the plan or fight against it. The gravity of their role in this intergalactic scheme was more than they could bear. The question was no longer whether they could stop the invasion, but whether they could stop themselves from becoming part of the very thing they hated. The protagonist's sense of betrayal ran deeper than ever. The alien forces were not just invaders, they were a part of humanity's past, shaped by those in power, guided by forces that had controlled everything. The protagonist's anger grew with each passing moment. How could they have been so blind? How could their family have let this happen? The more they thought about it, the more they realized that everything they had been taught, everything they had believed in, was a lie. The government's power, the leaders' promises, and the alien threat, it was all part of the same game. The only question left was, could they undo the damage their ancestors had caused, or would they become part of the cycle, repeating the same mistakes? The protagonist didn't know the answer, but they were determined to find it. With the knowledge of their family's dark legacy, they now had a choice to make: continue down the path set before them, or destroy it once and for all. With the weight of their family's legacy on their shoulders, the protagonist faced an agonizing decision. The knowledge they had uncovered could bring about the end of the alien conspiracy, or it could ensure humanity's ultimate destruction. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, the protagonist realized that they were not just fighting against the aliens. They were fighting against an entire system built on lies, manipulation, and control. The government's hidden agenda, their family's involvement, and the alien forces were all interconnected, each playing a role in shaping humanity's future. The protagonist had only one option: expose everything to the world. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to ensure that humanity had a chance to fight back. The world needed to know the truth, no matter the consequences. The protagonist knew that once the truth was out, there would be no turning back. The protagonist had made their choice. The evidence had been gathered, the truth was ready to be revealed, and the world would never be the same. But even as they prepared to release the information, they knew that the consequences would be far-reaching. Exposing the conspiracy would shatter the fragile illusion of control humanity had built over the years. People would panic. Governments would collapse. And the alien forces would strike back harder than ever before. But none of that mattered. The protagonist had seen enough, learned enough. There was no going back now. The time for secrets and lies was over. The truth was out, and the protagonist had to face the fallout. As the final decision was made, the protagonist realized that this was just the beginning. The fight for humanity's future was only starting, and the path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and filled with enemies on every side. But they were ready. The world had just been rocked by the revelation, but the aftermath was far from predictable. Governments were in turmoil, scrambling to regain control as the truth about the alien invasion and humanity's manipulation spread like wildfire. The protagonist, still reeling from the enormity of what they had unleashed, knew this was just the beginning. The world had been forced to wake up, but what came next? The alien forces were now on high alert, and humanity's defenses were fractured. The protagonist's choice to expose the conspiracy had set everything in motion, and as the chaos escalated, the protagonist was faced with a harsh reality. The fight for Earth had begun, but this time there were no guarantees. The protagonist, fueled by the urgency of the moment, prepared for the next steps, knowing full well that every decision would come at an enormous cost. As the protagonist prepared to lead the charge against the alien forces, they couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The world was fracturing, and humanity's survival now rested on their shoulders. The alien technology they had uncovered was powerful, but the consequences of using it were unknown. Was the cost worth the risk? The protagonist knew that using the technology might be humanity's best chance at survival, but it also risked changing them forever. The temptation was real, the allure of power, of turning the tide against the invaders, but the protagonist had seen firsthand what the alien forces were capable of. The price of victory could be more than they were willing to pay. Still, the alternative was equally grim. Exposing the truth had painted a target on their back, and the aliens would stop at nothing to wipe out any threat to their invasion. The protagonist's decision was made, and with it came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The alien technology hummed to life, a powerful force at their fingertips, and for a fleeting moment, the protagonist felt the rush of power. But it was fleeting. The world around them was changing faster than they could keep up. As humanity's last line of defense, the protagonist had to act. The alien forces were closing in, and every moment counted. The protagonist prepared to lead a group of soldiers and resistance fighters into battle, using the technology to create weapons and defenses that could stand against the invaders. The fight for Earth was about to reach its climax, and the protagonist knew that this was their moment, one that would either secure humanity's future or seal its doom. There was no turning back. The battle would be brutal, but it had to be fought. The final battle had begun, and every decision the protagonist had made led them to this moment. The world watched as the human resistance, equipped with alien technology, fought back against the invaders. But it wasn't just the aliens they had to worry about. The very factions of humanity that had worked with the aliens were now turning on each other, desperate to secure their own survival. The battle raged on. No one knew who would win, or if there would even be a world left to save. As the protagonist led their forces, they could feel the weight of every life lost in the fight. But they couldn't stop now. The alien forces were relentless, and the protagonist had to stay focused. Every move was critical. Every decision could change the tide of battle. The fate of humanity was hanging by a thread, but the protagonist wasn't about to give up. The battle had been won, but at a terrible cost. The alien forces were retreating, their ships scattering across the sky, but the protagonist could feel the weight of the sacrifices made. The fight had been brutal, and the world would never be the same. As the dust settled, the protagonist stood in the wreckage of the battlefield, surrounded by the broken bodies of allies and enemies alike. The technology that had once seemed like humanity's salvation now felt like a curse. The power to fight back had come at a price. The protagonist could feel the change within themselves. The cost of using the alien technology now etched into their being. Humanity had survived, but at what cost? The protagonist knew that the victory was only temporary. The truth had been exposed, but the consequences of that truth would ripple through history, leaving a world forever altered. The victory had come at a steep price. The alien forces were pushed back, but the world was irrevocably altered. Cities lay in ruins, the remnants of battles fought between humanity and the invaders. The protagonist stood at the edge of a world that was no longer the one they had known. Humanity had survived, but it felt like survival at the expense of everything. The technology they had once hoped would be their salvation had left scars, both on the planet and on those who wielded it. The protagonist walked through the streets, the atmosphere heavy with a sense of grief. People wandered in a daze, unsure of what to do now that the fight was over. For the first time, the protagonist began to wonder whether humanity would ever recover, or if the cost of survival would haunt them for generations to come. The truth was out, but the world was broken, and healing seemed impossible. The protagonist tried to move forward, but the weight of the past was impossible to shake. The truth about the alien conspiracy had shattered the illusion of security. Governments were in disarray, and factions that once stood united were now divided, each scrambling for power in the wake of the truth. The protagonist felt the pull of both the past and the future. What was left to rebuild? What did it even mean to rebuild in a world where the lines between human and alien had blurred so irrevocably? The protagonist's heart felt heavy as they looked at the faces of those around them. There were no easy answers. Trust had been broken, and humanity was left to piece together the fragments of a shattered world. The choice was now theirs, to lead humanity into the future, or let it fall into chaos. They could see the hope in the eyes of those who had fought alongside them, but also the fear of what was to come. Time passed, and the world began to adapt to its new reality. The protagonist, no longer a mere survivor but a leader, worked tirelessly to piece together what remained of humanity. The alien technology that had once seemed like a curse was now being used to rebuild and protect what was left of the world. The protagonist found a strange solace in the knowledge that they were helping to guide humanity through this new era, even though the scars of the past remained. Still, there was a lingering unease. The alien presence on Earth was not fully gone, and the truth about what had happened was too powerful to ignore. There were factions rising again, pulling strings from the shadows, and the protagonist knew that the struggle was far from over. The world had changed, but the fight for its soul had only just begun. As the protagonist worked to rebuild, they found themselves facing questions they couldn't answer. The future was uncertain, and while some saw the alien technology as a chance to make things right, others feared that it was simply another step toward losing humanity's identity. The protagonist had seen what this technology could do. The power it offered was beyond anything human hands had ever touched. And yet, the more they used it, the more it seemed to change them. The protagonist wondered whether humanity was truly ready to handle the knowledge and power that had been thrust upon them. Was it possible to reclaim the future, or had humanity crossed a line that could never be undone? As they stood in the ruins of their world, the protagonist realized that the true battle was no longer just about survival. It was about keeping humanity's soul intact while navigating the shadows of a past they could never escape. The dust of the battle had settled, but the protagonist knew that this was not the end. The alien forces had been driven back, but the world would never be the same. They had uncovered the truth, but now they faced the consequences of that truth. Humanity had learned what it meant to be vulnerable, to be caught in the crossfire of forces far beyond their understanding. The protagonist knew that the scars of the past would not fade easily. The road to rebuilding was long, and there would be many more challenges ahead. But as they stood on the precipice of a new world, the protagonist realized something important. Humanity was not defeated. The battle for Earth might have been won, but the fight for its future had just begun. The protagonist would be there, guiding humanity through the uncertainty, knowing that the path ahead was dark, but full of the potential for change. The battle for Earth was over, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on the protagonist. The world had been forever changed by the alien presence, and humanity had been forced to face a brutal truth. They were not alone in the universe. The protagonist stood at the ruins of what had once been a thriving city, now reduced to rubble. The war had brought humanity together, but it had also revealed the fragility of civilization. The streets, once filled with life, now echoed with silence. The alien ships, now lying in pieces, were a constant reminder of the battle fought and won. As the protagonist gazed at the horizon, they understood that this was only the beginning. The future of humanity lay in their hands, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. The world had survived, but at what cost? And would it ever truly heal? The world was trying to rebuild, but the damage ran deeper than physical destruction. Trust had been broken, and the world's unity fractured as different factions vied for control in the aftermath of the invasion. The protagonist's role had shifted. No longer just a survivor or a leader, they were now a symbol of humanity's resilience, but also its uncertainty. The truth they had exposed was now an indelible part of the global consciousness. People no longer viewed the government, or even each other, the same way. Yet, in this new world, the protagonist found themselves at a crossroads. How could they lead a fractured humanity, when they were just as broken inside. The weight of the truth, of everything that had happened, made them question their own purpose. Would they be able to guide humanity to a new future, or would they become lost in the very shadows they had revealed? As the days passed, the protagonist found themselves grappling with the realization that the fight wasn't over. The alien forces had retreated, but remnants of their influence remained. The technology they had left behind was now in the hands of those who sought to control it for their own gain. The protagonist, despite the peace they had fought for, knew that there were factions out there, human and alien, that would never stop pursuing their interests. The truth had been exposed, but it had also created chaos. Power had shifted in unexpected ways, and the protagonist's role in this new world had become far more complicated. They were not just a leader, they were a protector. And in a world where trust had been shattered, the protagonist knew that the battle for Earth's soul was far from over. They had to act. Not just for humanity's survival, but for its future. The protagonist stood at the edge of the world they had helped save, but their heart was heavy. The victory had been costly, and as they looked out over the world, they knew that the alien presence would always linger. There was no going back to what once was, and the future was filled with uncertainty. The alien technology, while powerful, had left scars on the planet and the people. The protagonist understood that true healing would take time, and trust would need to be rebuilt. But they also knew that humanity had proven its resilience. In this new world, where old alliances had crumbled, and new ones were yet to be formed, the protagonist found hope. The battle for Earth had been won, but the battle for its future was just beginning. The protagonist was ready to take on that challenge, to help guide humanity through the storm that lay ahead. In the quiet aftermath, the protagonist walked away from the ruins of the old world, and into the uncertainty of the new. The truth had been exposed, but it had come with consequences. Humanity was changed, and so was the protagonist. The weight of the world had been placed on their shoulders, but now they were ready to let go of the past. They knew that the fight for Earth was not just about survival. It was about understanding, rebuilding, and finding a new path forward. As they walked into the unknown, the protagonist couldn't help but feel the echo of the final words they had spoken before the war. This isn't over. It's just the beginning. The world would never be the same, but that was what made it worth fighting for. The protagonist had found peace in knowing that they had done everything they could, and now it was time for humanity to continue the journey without them.